How's it, guys? In today's installment, I'll be talking to Tando Shabalala. It's regarding the budget speech. And in an unprecedented move, we have a situation where the budget speech has been postponed. Now, personally, I'm one person that doesn't like to react to news, especially if politics is involved, because before you know it, you emotional, you're going with the wind and what people are saying instead of looking at the facts on the table. The facts being that, look, I mean, a budget is not a document that you just do for the sake of doing. It's a document that's meant to be debated, erased, whatnot. It needs to make sense. And so, with the powers given to the both the finance minister and the respective parties, if you have a situation where they can't agree on a budget, it makes sense that they would eventually come to postponing it. Obviously, they've considered legislation, the PFMA, Public Finance Management Act. They've considered whatever other acts are involved when you consider when you take such a step. So they're definitely within the rights. They're definitely within the law. So it's not advisable for us to get worked up around it. But yeah, here's my chat, Miss Chabalala. Hope you enjoy it. And yeah, in the comments, we can have a chat about what your views are.
How are you feeling that things played out yesterday? I think that we do have Lisa Fisher on the line right now. Lisa Fisher, are you there?
Yes, I am, Miss Chabalala.
Welcome and thank you for joining us.
No, always a pleasure. I look forward to these sessions.
So, Lisa Fisher, we had planned to unpack the budget speech this evening on Business Wrap, looking at the different elements that are usually included in the speech. Now, I know that this is made up of many components, but the one that we have all been talking about, and that shocked most of us, is the VAT increase. Now, Parliament Speaker Togo Didiza said that the proposed percent increase in VAT was just one of the many issues that could not be agreed upon. Now, we did not even allow ourselves to get into the many issues. We are all stuck on the VAT increase. But that
Hello, Mr. Chabalala. Mr. Chabalala.
Somebody drop one indeed. Yes. 7 to 9 a.m. So 88.1. Good times, music, all good. Business Wrap on the Business Buzz.
you are tuned into the Business Buzz on VOW 88.1. It is time for the Business Wrap, and we do have Lisa Hisham Tiane joining us online. Now, Lisa Hisha, we have had technical difficulties, but I was just explaining that Parliament Speaker Togo Didiza said that the proposed 2% increase in VAT was just one of the many issues that could not be agreed upon. And we were all stuck on the 2% increase that we didn't even get to explore the many other issues or even try find out what they could have been. But just to start off and to repeat my question, is there a difference between a percentage increase and a percentage point increase? And if so, what is it exactly?
Thank you very much, Ms. Chabalala. Look, the difference is very minute, but it's very a nuanced one. So inside 1%, there's what we call 100 basis points. So smart people or people that try be smart, oftentimes instead of saying we're going to have a 0.25% increase, they will say we're going to have a 25 basis points increase. Then you should just know that that basically is 25 out of 100. So a full percent increase would be 100 basis points.
Okay, all right. Thank you so much for clarifying that for us. Now, what do you make of what occurred yesterday in terms of the budget speech, the postponement, just the different political parties within the GNU?
Look, and I'm one person that tries to stick to my area of competence, which is finance, most of the time. So I shy away from politics. But I think just maybe a bit of background around how the national budget comes about and what it is. Sometimes these events get us excited, and it's a good thing that we started the year looking at the World Economic Forum and what that means for your financial plan. So I guess it's time for the budget. In essence, the budget is a communication from government, and government is not the ANC, government is not the EFF, government is not the DA. Government is all the parties that are represented inside parliament. So even your one seat parties are part of government. And so the budget speech represents the opportunity or that time where those parties then tell us how they have decided to spend tax money collected throughout the year based on what they think are the pressing issues in the country. So essentially, you'll have one expense that gets motivated for and then gets voted upon. And then that essentially is called a vote: vote one, vote two, vote three. And there'll be names attached to all of these votes up until you've got your full expenditure items. Then the next part, which is not really up for much debate, except to influence it, is then now that we've put out all of these priorities that we want to spend tax money on, how are we going to fund those priorities? And there's three primary ways that they can pay for those priorities. And if you're anything like the family I've been in, there often would be a meeting and they would have a look to see, are we going to get the money from taking out a loan as a family? Are we going to get the money from one individual who perhaps does more heavy lifting than the rest of us? Or are we as a family perhaps going to see if we can make people pay for some of the resources that we have as a family? So if you've got tents, emakaya, for example, you can charge people more to use your stretch tents. So for us as a country, it would be the consideration to either borrow money to tax the different taxpayers more money. So you and I, or companies. And then the last one is to tax goods and services. The thing about taxing goods and services is that you're not targeting someone in particular, but a particular lifestyle that people are living. And then, therefore, you then would be able to get more money from that designated lifestyle.
Sure. And so, I mean, that's a very good example that you've given us, and especially bringing it close to home and how we operate within our own families. Now, just to move on to what everyone has been talking about, the VAT increase. I mean, can you then just go a bit into that? What would that mean for me as an ordinary South African? I know earlier on I spoke about purchasing power, the decline in purchasing power, and the different ways that it could affect us. But I just want to hear your point of view on that.
Look, it's quite nuanced, and my view certainly. Not to say I line with the government, but when I read the budget speech, I think you attest late last night. What came out for me was that there almost isn't any other option except to increase the VAT. And so, when it comes to what it means for you and I, right? If you continue the normal spending that you have been doing, then obviously those goods, those items that you've been buying are going to cost more because the people that supply those goods and services are going to increase the price in order to cover the VAT. However, I've been very intentional about cautioning people that remember a lot of what you need and what government has designated as sufficient for you to be able to go about your day-to-day sustenance would be zero rated. So if I go to the store and I buy a banana, pineapple, chop it up myself in the kitchen, put it inside my blender and make myself a smoothie, I pay no VAT on that because I've bought the fruits in their basic form. You go to one of the major refreshment bars and you decide to rather buy the smoothie there. Source says, text Ms. Shabalala who went to buy a ready-made smoothie, VAT for value added by the shop owner, and you can allow Lesegisha to go zero rated. So essentially paying no VAT because he's still going to add the value himself. So it either means that you change nothing and you pay more, or you can look at what are the primary ingredients or the primary sources of your spending, and then those items, you essentially can purchase them and the VAT increase will have no impact on you. Then there's the category called exempt services. So things like educational institutions. So school fees should not be costing you more because the VAT is exempt from school fees. Things like financial services shouldn't be costing you more. So the act of just putting your money in the bank, that sort of thing, shouldn't be costing you more. So if you go through the detail of the VAT Act, what is zero rated, what is exempt, what is VATable, you'll realize that a lot of the things tend to be the items that are a bit higher above the basic need ladder.
Some of the items that are zero rated, are items such as maize meal bread,
Yeah.
cooking oil, but that still is not enough. It doesn't include or encompass all essential household purchases or just essential needs. For example, transport costs are likely to increase. There's school supplies. There's so many things that aren't included in that. Now, I've heard some people justify the increase as well by saying that, but then there's also an increase in the grants, the old age pension grants, the SASSA grants. There's going to be an increase or a proposed increase on that. I mean, is that enough?
Loaded question after a loaded statement. Look, in terms of whether the increase in the grant will be enough, I know they do say it is an above inflation increase. And even there, what you would be looking out for is what would an old age grant be purchasing? Ideally, an old age grant shouldn't be paying for transport for kids or what have you. And just on the transport issue, right? We must be careful. For example, this even within the transport sector, different types of transport modes that SARS has designated, and some of them would be zero rated versus others that would be VATable. And so even there, it basically almost ends up seeming like a back to school exercise for all of us as a citizenry, just so we can see which combination of goods and services we can consume without taking on the added VAT expense.
Thank you so much once again, Disakisha, for joining us and explaining that to us. I must say that smoothie example was very personal. It looks like where I was this morning, but I will make the decisions going forward. And we look forward to talking to you again in March. And hopefully by then the budget speech would have happened and we will have more to discuss. Thank you so much for joining us.
Always a pleasure, Ms. Shabalala.
And that is how we end the business wrap this evening with Lesegisha Mtiane. We were talking about the 2025 budget speech, which has been postponed to March. We are going to take a quick break, and when we do get back, it is time for the Business Corner.
Business wrap on the business.
Yeah, and that's how that conversation goes. And look, I think there's more that can be said around the not the budget issue. Um, and it's quite tough, you know. I think almost nothing would substitute for a growing economy. You know, when income earning opportunities are scarce, then you really end up milking the few that do contribute to the fiscus and do add a lot of money to the bottom line of a country. But yeah, I think the conversation that we had, as I said, I found it very difficult. I went through the budget speech. For example, the borrowing money option is not there because that's going to lead to higher interest obligations, which will then lead to higher inflation because then the Reserve Bank has to basically balance the fiscal position. Then when you go to taxpayers, as I said, taxing individuals, the individuals already contribute the biggest chunk. I think they contribute almost half now of the taxes that are collected. So it would be quite difficult to justify why you should tax individuals more. Companies are another difficult one. To note, companies actually contributed 12 billion more to taxes this year, whereas individuals decreased by 4.4 billion. But the reason taxing companies is often not as effective. Companies are just going to hire smart guys like myself to reduce their taxes, to interpret the tax act better and then make sure that they don't pay as much taxes. So that often tends to be a very difficult one. The other one is that companies are already in the business of reinvesting in the economy. They're growing the economy. They're hiring people. They are buying machines. They are improving goods and services, making them cheaper, making them more available in places that otherwise wouldn't be available. So you tend to not want to tax companies as much because their spin-off effect is basically quite widespread. Then, when we go to the tax on goods and services, already they've given us reprieve on the fuel levy. They haven't moved the fuel levy in 4 years. And on top of that, there's been a decline in the consumption of fuel, an 11% decline. So, that tax basically to increase it when fuel prices are already what they are would be a bit difficult. Then there's the sugar tax. Which is a contentious one because sugar actually causes illnesses, and that's how that tax was then introduced. It was basically like a sin tax for the good people. Abantu baphuza dash, lol. So that one is a bit is that it's not difficult to increase, but it's not going to bring in the amount of money that you actually require to close your fiscus. Then customs, so imports. Coming to the country, tariffs, that sort of thing. SARS had projected that it would grow by 3.8%. It shrunk by 1.3%. So it means on the positive side, you guys are buying local, which is good. However, you can't then want to strategically use a tax that is decreasing. It doesn't make sense because you're trying to collect more money. So then it leaves you with VAT, and as discussed in the talk show, I mean, with lower inflation, with lower interest rates, with a two-pot system now in place for our pension fund. So every year, one third of what you contribute to your pension will be available to you as a withdrawal. We then foresee that there is essentially a lot more appetite to buy more of the vegetable products, which then just logically then said to SARS, perhaps that's the area where we can increase the VAT. What I would have wanted to say on the show, right? It's clear that if there's such an uproar for a 2% increase in VAT, that 2% little amounts, inches matter. And for me, for a personal finance feature, I would say then that means that you should actually do the same with your finances. I mean, don't just look at your finances and look at the chunky big items that you can pay off or save or what have you, and then think to yourself that if they can't move, then there's nothing you can do. Can you imagine that if you take off 2% over five expenditures? That's 10% that you've taken off on your budget. Obviously, it depends on the size of the expenditure, but already it shows you that a small percentage of a very big expenditure or of a very big item can go a long way. It also shows that a small percentage increase at work can actually go a long way as well, because then it increases the overall ability that you have to cover your expenses and to cover your budget essentially. So that's one that I would put out there. The other one would be to say we have to hold government accountable. These parties, we voted for them, so they should explain what it is that they were disagreeing with, what they agree with, and what they propose. So if they push back on the VAT, what then becomes the next item that should get taxed? And I know, for example, they had made concessions on the two lower brackets of income tax. SARS maybe ends up saying that, you know what, maybe that lower bracket, let's actually not move it up. Let's tax them as we would have. So I think it's also very important in holding political parties and government accountable to go back to them and ask them that, listen, if you're saying no to VAT, what are you saying yes to? If you're saying we can borrow more money internationally, does that mean that in the coming years we have an even wider deficit because that money will come with interest obligations, exchange rate parity, so the rand being weaker against the pound, what have you? So you find yourself in a situation where there's a double penalty on the money that you've borrowed. So those are some of the notes that I had prepared for today's conversation with VOW FM. I think there is quite a lot to unpack. There is quite a lot to look at. But I'm hopeful. We're a resilient country. Um, but it's very clear that there's a lot that needs to go right for us to just now make it. I'm Chairman Mo, and I hope you enjoyed this feature. I hope you enjoyed this interview. Check you, Kamach, as they said. Cheers.